Good morning, everyone. It's such an exciting time to be here, and I'm super excited about this particular topic around making a better world. I just want to start off with, for those that are possibly vision impaired, is to kind of give you a little bit of description of who I am. I am Sandra Lopez, a woman. I'm wearing a linen skirt that's white, a white top, a black jacket. I go by the pronouns of she, her, and I am with 2-inch heels, about 5 feet 4 inches, and I have such an honor of representing Microsoft's advertising business, where we're super committed to ensuring that all businesses of all sizes simply achieve more. As a Latina in tech and a woman in tech, I've been surrounded by messages around why diversity and inclusion matters. And all of you have heard it. You have heard the case studies. And so I thought what was really important is to reframe the conversation. You have heard the stats, and from us, in terms of Microsoft, we ask everybody to be curious and ask yourself, what can we do as a collective to simply drive a better world? And so in that process, I want to share with you case studies in which better product design led to a better world. I joined Microsoft about 8 months ago, and I came across this particular story. It was a woman who was a program manager that recently joined Microsoft a couple years ago and sat down and was working with the engineering team, particularly around UX design. And so everybody was super excited about this particular design, and she was bold enough and courageous enough to take a look and say, is there an alternate UX design that we could present to our customers? Because she thought simply the blue was kind of stagnant, very corporate. And so she proposed a different design, which in her viewpoint was more welcoming, more open. And the team challenged her and said, no, we think the blue design is the best one for the particular product. And she said, well, let's just challenge it, let's go test it. So they test the UX design amongst 500 individuals, female and male, and guess what happened? It net neutralized. The females preferred the white. No surprise, the men preferred the blue design. So based on that data, they looked at, well, who uses Microsoft? It's predominantly men, so they continued with the blue design. But in itself resulted in what we like to call here at Microsoft the elite bias potential. The fact that engineers and business people were designing for 20% of a particular segment and not the other 80%. And even within the 20%, there was a bias. For the male, it was not only just male, it actually was a bias towards education, income, sexual orientation, and overall career. So within that 20%, it was even biased amongst the men. And so for us, really what's important as we collectively go through the overall transformation here at Microsoft is we think about, well, what about the other 80%? What are you leaving on the table? And if you're lacking diversity in terms of analyzing your data, you're introducing bias in your product and business development. So the key takeaway in this particular example is that you have to look at your customer analytics and surround yourself with various individuals to ask questions around the data that you're seeing. Is it truly representative of your segment? In this case, they were thinking about male, predominantly using Windows, and in itself, there was biases that existed within that particular data. I want to show you another example. I showed this to my daughter just recently. She thought it was like an NFT creative art, and I'm like, no, it's a graph full of data. And this one in particular is showcasing the complex journey that is taken by purchasing a car. They analyzed over 500,000 different data points. And the team decided to get really curious and seek to understand the data. And one of the easiest things, so we're talking about genders, was to take a look at the difference between men and female. And to no surprise, there was a difference. And these are just showing bands from the beginning of a consumer journey, whether you're male or female, to the end of the consumer journey. And it was a known fact for purchasing a car, on average around the world, it takes about 26 weeks. And looking into the data, and if you think about go-to-market and product features that you want to highlight, how you engage with your customers, they notice a significant difference. For a female, basically, they were going after non-branded search terms. So think about, like, I want an SUV, I want a compact car. So if you were a car manufacturer and you think that your consumer audience is going to start with a particular model, that doesn't represent 50% of the population, while the men really focus on luxury cars. There's other different capabilities in which we, as individuals and consumers, search. Females are interested in understanding the financing, dealership, because what we do know is oftentimes females end up paying more for cars than men. So what you do is, if you break this data apart, you start to think about what features do you want to highlight, how do you want to go to market, and the important characteristic is that if you design a product or you go to market for the average, you're really designing going to market for no one. And then you don't know what you don't know. We knew that the average car buyer takes 26 weeks. But what about if you get curious and you embrace the growth mindset, something that Microsoft tends to do very well? What about if you look at 52 weeks? What happens then? What do we learn? We talk about diversity and inclusion. It's not always about ethnicity. It's not always about gender. It could also be about people with disabilities. And think about those individuals that are looking for cars that are adaptive and what they need to consider so it's actually the best car for them given their overall hardships. And so when you think about the adaptive car and you think about the graphs that exist in terms of this data-centric world, really thinking about the analytics that exist. And how do you look at the data? What questions do you seek to ask? How do you want to learn more so that you design for the other 80% and take advantage of what is on the table from an overall business opportunity? Now, if you still don't believe diversity and inclusion matters when you actually are designing for product in a better world, I want to give you another example. Computer vision. So there were a group of engineers that were working on computer vision in terms of being able to track individuals. And in this particular case, there was a homogeneous group. And what happened in building the algorithm, they forgot one key part. As humans, we have various different skin tones. Some are lighter, some are darker, and they forgot to design in the algorithm darker skin tones. So if I'm dark and I'm against this black floor, the computer vision wouldn't decipher if I was a human being or a floor. And so think about the opportunity that was missed purely based on skin tone. And so you think about that and you start to ask yourself, what are you overlooking in your segments? Should you not be thinking about inclusive design from the very beginning so that we ultimately deliver a better world? And Microsoft has been on this journey with Satya. It's been wonderful to observe and see, being there 8 months. And I do believe there are many other people that are also driving us on this journey. And so with that, I want to continue the conversation and introduce our panelists that will be having a conversation around diversity and inclusion in the technology industry, as well as inclusive product design. So with that, I want to first introduce you, many of you guys know, is Donna. Donna is the CEO and chairman of the LoRa Alliance, overseeing the organization, its strategy and direction to drive the global adoption of the LoRaWAN standard. Welcome, Donna. We have Cecilia Chief Operating Officer and co-founder at Webee, a 360 asset intelligence platform for connected industrial manufacturing operations that serves the Fortune 500 companies in the industrial space. She has received many accolades. She was named winner of M12's Global Female Founders Competition, recognized as one of Silicon Valley's Business Journal's most influential women. And in addition, her company has been recognized by Fast Company's 2021 World Changing Ideas Awards as an example. So welcome. We have Violeta. She's an ex-investment banker turned IoT entrepreneurial. Love those pivot stories. She has over 12 years of M&A. She has restructuring project management experience, previously part of Lazard, Blackstone, and PJT Partners, restructuring and special solutions teams in London, spanning from Europe and Middle East, advising on deals totaling over $25 billion. Welcome, Violeta. And we have Rohit, Vice President and Global Principal of Manufacturing at HCL. Rohit is the Vice President of Global Industrial Cloud Principal at HCL CloudSmart, and extensive experience and expertise in advancing global sustainability, which we love, with increasing efficiency across IoT, businesses, smart logistics, smart cities, smart agriculture, and smart buildings. So welcome, Rohit. Welcome. I'm getting old, so I gotta wear my glasses. So. Okay, so let's get the conversation started. I first want to focus on just diversity and inclusion. I remember in 2015, I was at CES, listening to my former CEO at Intel at a keynote. And it was a surprise to us because we saw his practice, and at the very end, he told the entire industry at large around the importance of diversity and inclusion, and it challenged the industry. So I want to start talking about the advancements that we have or have not made. And I want to start with you, Donna, because I thought it was really interesting that the LoRa Alliance started in 2015. And when Brian challenged the industry, there was so much opportunity. And you talked about it in an interview that I looked at, and you were highlighting the importance of innovators, entrepreneurs, technologists, and futurists, who are the most brilliant minds changing the world. I'm curious to understand, where do you see diversity in regards to the overall talent composition, and have you seen progress over, arguably, we're almost close to a decade?
Yeah, thank you. Hello, everybody. So the LoRa Alliance, as being an open alliance, specifically around the LoRa Alliance, it's built in inclusion and diversity. Because we're an open alliance, we're a standard. We have companies that are small and large. We have startups. We have people and companies from all over the world. They network and partner together regardless of size. So the alliance is all about diversity and inclusion. But I have seen growth. Having women run businesses, joining the alliances and whatnot. But you know, passion, and particularly what you stated around innovations and whatnot. The innovations come from passion. And passion comes from individuals that have something that they have usually personally experienced and they want to solve or make better. And so I think with the Alliance, we see a lot of the growth. It's open to everybody to bring ideas forward and move the standard forward. And it's based on those passions that come from every sector, every race, religion, gender, comes from everywhere. And just as a couple examples, there's one of our thingy IoT in my keynote you saw. I mean, he had a passion. He was a volunteer firefighter, and he had a passion for it, and he drove it, and he left Cisco to go drive that forward. And so that passion I see with other businesses, whether it's, someone had a grandparent that took a fall, and now they're really wanting to drive, mobile types of applications using LoRaWAN. So the passions are inclusive because everybody has an experience. And so I would say with LoRaWAN, the greatest thing that I see, and most standards really, depending on the standard, but It's really around the diversity of passion and the diversity of experience that I see within the Alliance. And yes, it can continue to grow, but I think the biggest statement is the diversity of experience, because that's why you see us in so many verticals, in so many markets, in so many types of solutions. It's that diversity of experience that's driving the passion, that's driving us in all these sectors.
I like your point around passion, and I want to go to Cecilia around passion, because you highlight in terms of Webee's commitment to driving cutting-edge technologies, and you're also a Latina in technology. And so I'd love to understand the passion that Webee has around AI, computer vision, and you as a Latina, and how is that getting incorporated?
So in terms of our company, I think being a Latina has been really has made a difference from the beginning when we started envisioning the product and what we needed to do and how the product needed to look like, not just for a certain market segment, but just for the world, right? How do we expand what we're doing for one specific industry into the world? And that diversity comes from different backgrounds, right? Having different mindsets and different perspectives into building the product has been critical to help us achieve that. And when we started building, there's so many things that could be solved with IoT, and the passion that we got to connect both worlds, all of the challenges that the world needs to be solved and how IoT could be an enabler for that. And from there to designing a product that is really basically a no-code tool set that allows anyone to build a very complex application without the need of specialized engineering. That's how we came up with that idea, and we came up with that end result because we had different backgrounds when we were building the product from the ground up. And it wasn't really easy. It's a very complex product that we built, but we believe it's the future for IoT. Just giving the frontline workers, giving the citizen developers the power to build their own applications in a very simple way. And we challenge that every day. Every single new modules, every single thing we do is like, if anyone in the team can build a complex application, all the way from onboarding a sensor to building an app, then anyone should be able to do it in terms for us to feel like it's finalized and it's complete. So it's not just building, or it's not just about data, it's not collecting data, it's about the user, which is a totally different approach. It's not just about multiple data points and getting everything on an application. It's about the person that is going to use that and how that process is going to iterate, because it starts with collecting data, but it doesn't end there. It just starts there. And then there's an iteration until the final user understands exactly what they need. And you only get that if you think with a diverse mindset and just including everyone along the way, everyone that has to make use of that information and that application.
So you talk about the diversity of background, and you think about the customer experience, and I'm just going to go to Rohit from HCL Technologies. To that point, like McKinsey talked about how through COVID, the digitization of everything happened around, it accelerated 10 years. And you have the fortunate opportunity to talk to many industries and many companies. I'm curious in terms of, going back to Cecilia's point, like the diverse background and different perspectives. Where does that come in your consulting with all companies and various industries?
Excellent point. Well, there's another dynamic with post-COVID. The world around us has changed, right? I was at a McKinsey conference where I happened to hear the keynote from Eric Schmitz, and a couple of points which kind of got etched into the memory was the pace of change will never be this slow again with technology. And the second was, the big data game is overstated. The real intelligence is in the algorithms. And to Cecilia's point, that's where the real power comes in. And if I extend Cecilia's point, the algorithms are really something which are closest to the customer experience. And the inclusive design we talk about is all about driving the customer experience and including that 80% which you spoke about earlier on into the mix as well. Now, from our perspective, when we are looking at this entire change which is happening, a couple of real examples which are already there, right? If you look at Tesla as a car, it's really a software in a box, or you can call IoT use case, wherein there is a real-time feed which is happening from the end user experience, wherein the driver data is being sent back, and then within 48 hours, you can actually send a software update to put something which could address what the customer experience enhancement potentially could be. You mentioned skin tone, right? That's another example wherein if it was done in a canned environment, potentially with a large user set, large database, within a labs ecosystem, you could have potentially seen, okay, what can happen and can we put any remediation in place. So from HCL's perspective, we are looking at Meta Labs to co-create at scale with cloud, which enables us to actually create it in a very canned environment, the outcomes, leveraging the customer experience, and I'll talk more about it as we go along.
Got it. So we've been talking a lot about diversity from different perspectives, and oftentimes when people think about diversity, we think about gender, ethnicity. One thing I feel like it's often overlooked is socioeconomic status. And I would love for Violeta to talk about MClimate, and you think about sustainability, but then there's the other equation around just affordability. And so love to hear your point of view, how you guys are thinking about that and incorporating people's social status into your product development.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Yeah, for us, diversity really has many dimensions, and one of them is energy poverty. It's one of the sustainability development goals of the United Nations, so it's number 7, if anyone cared. But essentially, it's trying to solve equation that will save not only a specific group of people, but people that have access to energy or no access to energy, and make it more accessible. So some of our solutions using IoT are actually controlling that energy, making it more efficient, or allowing people who have no ability to access it better. And I think it's not just a problem of energy poverty in poor countries. It's a problem that's growing in Europe and in the US as well. Since energy prices are going up, everyone needs to take steps to responsible consumption and find ways to tackle this for us and for the environment going forward. So it's one of the aspects that we care about, is that everyone has access to it or control over it with the help of governments, obviously.
I mean, the flexibility of choice is very important. I think nowadays with the gas prices, people think twice if they're going to travel, that 50-mile radius. So with that being said, I kind of want to I highlighted a couple examples in terms of oftentimes diversity inclusion is like, okay, did you meet the stat? Do we have enough diverse people? But really, it's about driving change in your product development or your services or your experiences so that we do build a better world. And it's just not just designing for any one type. You're considering economic, social, cultural barriers. Donna, you focus on organizational design principles. Mm-hmm. And I think that's really important because how you design an organization leads towards success. So what's your advice in terms of how do you think about diversity in the context of organizational design?
Well, it starts with the leadership, right? And the leadership drives culture. It tends to run down. And it's what the leadership says and does, and probably more importantly, what they don't say and what they don't do, that really drives the culture, right? It's the actions that aren't spoken or non-actions. So it really starts with the leadership. And I think historically in technology, it's a lot of big companies that tend to drive, the hyperscalers and drive the business forward. And a lot of those cultures, the bigger you are, the harder it is to change a culture, right? These smaller startups can spin much faster. But I have seen with the pandemic, it's habits and culture that drive this. And with the pandemic, it has shaken a lot of the habits of hiring or thinking around. And it's also with ESG. I personally have seen and talked to quite a few companies that are really making an effort around the governance and the leadership of organizations. So ESG is making a difference for the shareholders and for the market. So I would say in the last 2 to 3 years, there is definitely a change, and I think the change that I'm seeing is because, like I said, the habits have been loosened up in terms of organizational and leadership. But yeah.
So you're talking about, Donna, the habits and leadership. And I think as technology, I always tell people we have the responsibility to drive society for good. And I'm going to go to you, Rohit, because we're going to talk about metaverse. And we've learned a lot around the impacts of social media and what has happened from mental health. And metaverse is kind of the next generation of emerging technologies. How are we going to learn from the past? And what are we doing so that we are truly inclusive in the next generation of technologies?
Absolutely, and that's a wonderful outlook to take from where we are, because I think fundamentally, I think if we look at the key topic we are addressing today of inclusive design, it's really a human-centered approach to design, that helps co-create something which is from one to many. And to me, whether we talk metaverse or Web 3.0, these are really technology enablements which are happening for the future, wherein we are trying to connect the physical world to the virtual world. And the technologies which are, even LoRa, and other mediums which are enabling it. On one side, we're looking at, what is the driver behind it, which are sometimes the customer experiences, which can be ported into the virtual world. Sometimes it's the new technology enablement of virtual currency, whether enabled by blockchain and more. And really to connect it towards the end of it, we've got all kind of technologies, whether it's IoT to the shop floor guy in manufacturing, whether we're talking about the low latency of 5G, which is or whether the cloud costs have gone down and it's pennies and you can buy it online now. All those are really enablements towards that physical and virtual coming together. Now, the biggest question which we will have to dive in is that for each of the industries, how are we dealing with it? And we, as HCL, we were at the World Economic Forum earlier this year, where we launched Meta Labs, which are very industry-specific, wherein we co-created the design and a scalable outcome for specific use cases in these Meta Labs, which are a subset of what the virtual world for those particular industries could look like. I love the point in manufacturing wherein, the guy at the shop floor needs to have a better experience. He could be able to create an application and do no code in no time if he can enable that, right? How do we enable that? Can we enable that using, Meta Labs at HCL or using the technology to bring them to speed? Talent is the biggest challenge right now. What if we make the people on the shop floor talented enough to actually be the driver of that change, So from our perspective, I would say less on banking because that's probably seeing a lot of change already on the back of it with blockchain and more happening, virtual currency becoming the transit point or probably being the key driver for that change to happen. And if you look at healthcare, health tech, the less we say, the more it is out there. Fundamentally, to me, the principles will never change, at least from my perspective. There are two elements, which is, one is change is the only constant, what I said earlier. The answer to that is continuous modernization and real-time feedback loops, incrementally including elements of diversity in it and anything else which is very, very industry-specific. This is the crux of how I see these tenants will go in the near future. And Meta Labs is the answer, but then as we evolve, there will be more as we progress.
You talk about real-time continuous feedback, and earlier you were telling us the story about Tesla and how it had representation of all customers as it was optimizing its software.
Correct. Absolutely. This is directly from I heard the CIO of Tesla, when he was being hired, what was the one-line brief. And this is not verbatim, but the summary I got away from it was that Elon wanted him to create something which can, within 24 hours, give the customer feedback into the shop floor, and within 48 hours, give it back to the customer. And I raised my hand high. I shared with you a personal example as well, wherein actually I saw it happening. Will take too long to share that example because it's a story about my wife actually, brushing the side of my Tesla, and it was painful, but eventually that feedback went, and they enabled the sideways cameras in summary on the back of it. But the point is that, because change is the only constant, we are living in a world wherein, ethically speaking, COVID wasn't there or pandemic wasn't there. We've acknowledged it that things can happen, right? Many more elements have come about. So we are making incremental changes. And to me, inclusiveness, diversity-led co-creations need to be done in environments like Meta Labs, wherein you are trying to evolve something which could be future. But at the same time, also look at what's out there and bring that in as well. It's a co-creation of an outcome which happens. And that real-time feedback loop for many industries is now becoming the forefront. But for many, there is some journey ahead of them. And we go as we go along.
As you go along, I mean, one of the things that we talk about often is, algorithms and AI. And I often like to say, if you look, several decades ago, you had fashion, sports, music that informed culture. I really believe that technology is informing culture, and algorithms are going to inform our values. And so, Cecilia, being involved in AI and computer vision, love to hear your point of view around how are we taking inclusive product design and thinking about AI and the responsibility we have to make sure that we are reflecting the values of everyone, not just the narrow few.
Yeah, so I think that in terms of AI, we should see it as an enabler for people to do their work better. That's, we work in manufacturing and agriculture, and for us it's all about not just the information that we can provide or how much visibility we can give them, but how we help them understand better what's going on in production. And the only way we see that working out and AI being an enabler for that is when you really involve those people that are actually interacting with the process in the process of building the tools. And we insist on that because we have seen IoT failing and POCs failing to scale because they have this approach of just collecting data or having AI and then enforcing that top-down in an organization. And when you do that, then there's cultural friction on adopting the technology because it might be data, but it's not helping me do my job better.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So when you shift that into understanding that this is a tool for someone else and for the people that are actually running the different processes in the organization, then it shifted the way people adopt technology, and it improves the way that it continues to organically grow within the organization. So we truly believe that digital transformation in these environments is really bottoms up, and AI comes in line with that, and computer vision comes in line with that. These are tools to help workers do their job better.
And you brought earlier the notion of customers. Do you bring customers into the design process, or are you depending on technologies to feed back in? Can you
Both.
Okay. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so let's say that you are, for example, there's a very specific project in computer vision that we are working on, which is smart lenses, smart glasses for workers in warehouses, so they can understand exactly how many products they are packing into the pallets, and just, it's kind of giving them the specific work order that they need to do through the glass, and then also keeping accountability of the efficiency of the process. The way it was done before was either with a different type of computer vision that didn't involve them, or how they were actually physically interacting with the process. So by giving them that computer vision product and testing it inside with them, we realized that what they really needed it was first getting their hands free, like getting very much focused on the task, and then secondly, understanding the rhythm of their body, towards the
Right.
task. And those are things that are improving safety and health for them in the workplace, and at the same time giving us the data we need to ensure that the process is being enforced. But without involving them in questioning about how they are using it, observing how they are using the headset in that sense, or before the headset, the different cameras that were capturing the data in the warehouses, would have never been able to understand exactly what they needed to make the work better. And this applies to almost everything. We have developed solutions and applications in a production line, and if you give an iPad or a tablet to someone that is working in a very repetitive process, it's not helping them do their job. It's actually adding more complexity. And you might think that, okay, you have the data there, it's telling you that there's an error somewhere in the line, but it's adding more complexity because they have to be handling multiple handhelds in the production line. So just by observing or asking, just even asking if that information is making sense or how they want to see it, they will give you the feedback that exactly what they need. So, and in most of the cases, it's much more simple than what we were thought when we started developing the application. And then, the reason why we have this no-code application builder is that because you have different levels within the organization, they need to access different types of data in different ways. And that's super important to make sure that the information you're collecting and processing, it's adding value to the end goal of the organization.
I think your point around being in the live environment is really important. I heard a story around headsets, and one thing we have to recognize, we talk about like diversity, we all have different head sizes, and for some of the headsets, it doesn't fit some of the heads, right? So really thinking about the segment that you're serving at large. So going to like being in somebody's real life environment, I want to go to you, Violeta, because you talk about sustainability, you're talking about smart homes, yet arguably many homes were built 20, 50 years ago without sustainability in mind. So how are you rectifying that? How are you driving sustainability that thinks about diversity of like all different types of homes, older homes, new homes, if you can share a little bit perspective of that?
Yeah, and it's just not homes, it's also buildings in general. So it's schools, hospitals, and public sector in general that we retrofit to make them smart. So essentially the product design of our solutions has to work anywhere in the world. And for example, for radiators, we retrofit 95% of the world radiators, which is it's a big percentage. But yeah, it's a big issue, but sustainability drives not only the decisions that we promote for the end customers, it also drives our product design internally. So we kind of focus on the battery. LoRaWAN is definitely helping in reducing the lifetime, increasing the lifetime of the battery and reducing the energy consumption. But we also internally spend a lot of time on R&D to even compare with everything else on the market to have a device that not only promotes energy efficiency at the end of it, but it's efficient in itself. And works everywhere in the world. So it's the two parts of the design are make something useful and for the end customer, and again, the end customer drives a lot of the decision making here. You don't want to have a bulky industrial looking IoT device at home or in a public building where everyone sees it. They're usually very sleek, Apple looking like devices, even though it's IoT and it's not the regular thermostat, for example. But it's also a device that will help you drive your responsible consumption anywhere in the world.
So around sustainability, I mean, oftentimes it's bottom line results, right? I'm curious, and we talked about this earlier, with regards to the trade-offs. And what are you seeing corporations do in terms of the incorporation of sustainability? We know the next generation, they're focusing on values, they're focused on sustainability, saving the earth. What's the climate in terms of the customers that you're talking to?
Yeah, so essentially previously it was all about ROI and KPIs and measurable impact, and our solutions does give you that. So it's energy savings up to 35%. There's things you can measure. It's return on investment within 1 year with the devices, and with energy prices rising, that's even going lower. But now I think sustainability is playing a bigger part as well. So this is part of the equation, and it's becoming more and more important. So people were focused previously on fighting the impact of energy consumption. So data centers is one point, for example. But in general, they were not looking to reduce energy consumption. They were trying to plant trees afterwards. They were buying green certificates that are becoming more and more expensive. So they were trying to figure out what to do after they emitted, after the emissions were already there, essentially. Yeah. So what we try to do is help them reduce the emissions to start with. So we take the bottom-up approach from its core. And I think companies are realizing that even their own portfolios of buildings, offices, commercial, residential, are emitting a lot, which is something they can avoid, they can put in their ESG report. And essentially, it's data. It's not only collecting the data, but it's also using that data to report on it that drives their decision to use IoT for sustainability.
You were, I mean, you kind of highlighted a point in terms of just sustainability being part an overall journey. And I want to ask the panelists all this one question, is that I do believe we're all in a journey. Some are more advanced than others, and some are just beginning. I've had the fortunate opportunity to be part of Microsoft and be involved in the journey and the transformation that they're doing in terms of inclusiveness, inclusive product design. I'm going to start with you, Donna. We have a captive audience in the room and virtually as well. What would be your piece of advice? If you can give them like one thing in terms of, regardless of where you are in the journey, and you think about diversity and inclusion, and oftentimes it's a stat, yes, we see it, we read about it, but what can they do to just drive short-term action that's easy, frictionless, to drive change so that we drive a better world?
Yeah, and like you said, everyone's at a different stage. What I would say is it really needs to come from the organization, the people. They need to speak up, just like your woman in your example about the logo, right? It is up to all of us to speak up and speak the truth and speak for others that aren't in the room. And my one thing is, and especially women tend to not speak up. I do a lot of coaching and mentoring of women, and that is probably the number one thing I see, is that their voice just needs to get louder, and it's an important voice, and speaking up is what will make the change.
So, Donna, to that point, often in a sea of men, right, in a room, how can men, because we have some men here, help the females speak up? What would you suggest for our colleagues, our male colleagues, to do?
Yeah. I think it's just by having support. I mean, the board that I'm on now are all men, and they hired me in as a woman to chair the board and lead the board. And, LoRa Alliance has probably more women and diversity of culture than maybe some other standards groups. But I think it's just around, finding the group that appreciates the talents that you offer. And if they don't, then don't be there. I mean, my board appreciates my leadership. It's not about being a woman. It's about the leadership. It's about, the innovation or the strategic pieces that you add. And if you're in a situation where it's not there, don't be there.
Yeah. Goes back to your earlier point about culture.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
So find the right culture for you. Cecilia, what would be your advice?
I think like in the same line of Donna, I think it's important to speak up and don't be afraid of doing it. I remember my early days in my career, I was super scared to kind of understand whenever I noticed that something wasn't right, because you get used to things not being right, and you get used to those dynamics. And I think that when you start speaking up, a lot of the times the reactions are not as bad as you might expect, because we're all kind of victims of unconscious bias. So just give the other the chance of, raising awareness when you speak up and you say, hey, this, maybe we should try this, and maybe we should approach this a certain, more diverse way. So I would say, both ways. I think that gender equality, it's an issue, and inclusion in general is not just a female or male issue. I think it's something that it's on all of us, and really speaking up and don't being afraid to say or raise your hand when something is not right. It has certainly a direct impact in the interaction that you're having in your organization.
Violeta?
We don't have that much of a problem when it comes to inclusivity, because it's a smaller company, started in 2015, and 2 of our C-level members are female out of 5, so it's quite a big mix. But yeah, essentially, I think what we get most of people in general when we work together and getting their opinions and counting those opinions into our equation of how we make our strategy work is we find informal settings where that works better. So people are encouraged to share their experience, and how would they do it? So finding maybe an informal setting for your employees and people in the whole organization is important to
What
make
would
those
be an
voices.
example of an informal setting and
Like team building events, for example. I know during COVID it was very difficult, but now people are longing for this to get away in the nature. We do a lot of nature trips, trekking, and then people share more openly. So it doesn't feel stiff like sitting on a Zoom call or in the office environment in a boardroom. You get much more out of it, sharing opinions outside of the office, but listening to those opinions as well and taking them on board.
it's kind of a manifestation. There was a research report, I believe it was with Google, in terms of high-performing teams, and the difference was psychological safety and the ability to speak up and share your point of view. And I think in an informal setting, if
Yeah.
you get to know the human being, you're more open to express yourself and share the perspective without feeling that there's, somebody's going to get reprimanded and or there'll be an implications in terms of your overall performance. Rohit, what would be your advice?
I think the two topics we're discussing here, right? One is, of course, how we deal with the unconscious bias, subconscious bias, and lead to enabling that. Another angle which I'd like to take on that is, I think, we are culture is a subset, or society is a subset of culture, depends upon how you look at it. And there is an element of what is happening in, small units at home. And I remember these conversations with my daughter, who is the diversity champion in her school. And, the element of, what's today available out there, for people to read about and learn from and implement with technology, the acceleration which is happening. I think the more we are empowering, the younger generation from that perspective, the more outcomes and hopefully, then what we see in the corporate world and non-corporate world for that matter will trickle in. So I would like to take a slightly larger perspective on that. And the other element, I think, on inclusive design, where to the industries, where should we start to where we started the question, where should we start? One, I'll reiterate the element of continuous modernization, but I thought about an example, how do I give you a real example of continuous modernization? So, and matching to, the smart buildings and smart cities. And so I was engaged in a smart building, perhaps Intel's first smart building globally in Israel. We spoke about it in partnership with Microsoft. And it was super exciting because we had the latest and the greatest of IoT enablers and network providers and everything, the ecosystem, fantastic. And what we created was a great return on investment on the back of it, fantastic use cases, and we worked towards that. So that was one end of the spectrum where you are creating maybe in a little bit of a lab environment because it was a very isolated case, but we then showcased to the world that this can be done. So one is capture that future. The other is, which is a pet example of mine, a refinery in Scotland which had been there for 150 years, and we had to make it smart. Okay, and that's where the retrofitting part comes in. And the benefits of doing a little bit of incremental, continuous modernization in that factory with IoT and more, even making it paperless, as simple as that. Yeah. The environment had probably a similar amount of an impact on the back of it. So it's like we all are in a journey, right? Something is out there, grab it. Something is in the past, bring it forward. And really, that to me is the continuum we all are working towards. So that's how I connect the two.
It's always a journey, and I think if we could take a step back and hear all of your guys' stories and your perspectives and the case studies that I showed earlier, is that inclusivity is not a stat. It's just about building a better world, and it starts with leaders, and leaders like Donna for taking the time for LoRaWAN to talk about this. And so thank you for you really pushing this topic. I think it's very important. That's the path that we will eventually drive forward. So ultimately, I always like to say, looking at the 1% that informs society, we won't stop until we see a kaleidoscope of individuals that really reflect society. So thank you, Donna. Thank you, everybody, for listening this morning. And we'll continue the conversation.
Great.
Thank you. Thank you for hosting us.
Good. Nice.